Before we proceed, viewer discretion is highly advised. The following content is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. They were once seen as Hollywood royalty to dynasties, built on fame, power, and influence. On one side stood the Smiths, Will, the charismatic king of blockbuster films, his wife Jada, and their equally magnetic children, Jaden and Willow. And on the other side, Sean Diddy Combs, music mogul, entrepreneur, a self-made empire whose name echoed across studios and clubs like a thunderclap. For years, their worlds intersected at premieres, award shows, exclusive parties, but behind the Instagram smiles and red carpet poses, something far darker was festering. And when the truth began to unravel, it didn't come from an investigative journalist or a leaked memo, it came from Jaden Smith himself. The courtroom was hushed, cameras weren't allowed, but reporters could feel the tension in the air as Jaden walked up to the stand. He didn't look like the kid from The Karate Kid anymore. He was tall, dressed in a black suit, jaw tight, eyes shadowed by years of silence. What he said next would stun even the most jaded courtroom observers. But to understand the weight of that moment, we have to rewind. In the early 2010s, Jaden Smith was at the height of his teen fame. He had just co-starred with his father in After Earth, launched his own fashion line, and was experimenting musically with a new generation of creatives. Among his circle of friends were other children of Hollywood power, Kylie Jenner, Justin Bieber, and others. But one name kept recurring in the background: Diddy. Sean Combs had always taken a keen interest in the next generation. To some, he was a mentor, a generous guide to young talent. To others, his closeness to youth, especially young male celebrities, seemed peculiar. He was known to throw lavish mentorship retreats, fly rising stars to his mansions in Miami and Los Angeles, and invite them to his late-night house gatherings. It all looked glamorous from the outside, but what went on inside those walls? That's the question that would later haunt the public and, most tragically, the victims. According to public records, Jaden first met Diddy when he was just 14 years old. Their first documented appearance together was at a fashion event in New York, where paparazzi photos captured Diddy with his arm around the teenage Smith, smiling proudly. From there, the relationship seemed to grow. There were trips, dinners, photo shoots. Diddy once even said in an interview that, "Jaden reminds me of me when I was younger, full of vision, not afraid to be different." But as more evidence would later reveal, those mentorship moments may have concealed manipulation. In 2024, as lawsuits against Diddy began to stack up, ranging from abuse to trafficking, more people stepped forward. But few expected a member of the Smith family to break the silence. Behind the scenes, Jaden had wrestled with trauma for years. He had told close friends vague stories about weird energy at certain celebrity houses, and how being famous so young put him in situations that never felt safe. Friends noticed he would sometimes go quiet when Diddy's name came up. Still, no one pressed. But in December 2024, a federal investigation into Diddy's business dealings and alleged abuse led prosecutors to subpoena dozens of people, including former party guests, assistants, security guards, and yes, even Jaden Smith. At first, Jaden resisted. He didn't want to be dragged into a storm he had tried to escape for years. But when federal agents showed him a list of other victims, some younger than he had been, some still missing, something shifted. He agreed to testify. In court, Jaden recounted a night that occurred when he was 15 years old. It was at his family's home in Calabasas. Diddy had come over with his entourage under the guise of helping Jaden work on a music project. Will and Jada were away on a press tour, and the house staff had been dismissed for the night. According to Jaden, what started as a creative session turned into something much darker. He described the sudden arrival of several unfamiliar guests, men he didn't recognize, but who acted like they belonged. The drinks kept flowing, though Jaden insisted he never drank, but others did. He recalled loud music, flashing lights, and being ushered into a room with Diddy and two other men, where conversations turned deeply personal and inappropriate. When asked why he didn't come forward then, Jaden said something that left the court silent. "I didn't have the language to name what was happening. I thought it was just Hollywood being Hollywood. But I realize now ... I was being groomed." He paused, then added, "I thought being around people like Diddy was part of becoming successful. I didn't know you could say no." As reporters scribbled furiously and the judge leaned forward, the prosecution introduced a new set of documents: security camera screenshots, timestamped texts between Jaden and a friend, and even a partial recording that seemed to capture audio from that very night. On the tape, Diddy's voice could be heard asking Jaden to relax and let go. Language prosecutors argued was manipulative and predatory. Diddy's legal team objected. They claimed the audio was out of context, that Jaden's recollection was influenced by media sensationalism, but the damage was already done. The world was listening. By the end of that first court session, the hashtag justice for Jaden was trending globally. The Smith family, once revered for their poise and unity, now found themselves center stage in a courtroom drama that exposed the rot under Hollywood's polished surface. Will Smith didn't release a statement, but sources close to him say he was devastated and had no idea the extent of what had occurred under his own roof. And as for Jada, she was reportedly in tears after the testimony, embracing her son till he stepped down from the witness box. But the most shocking details were still to come, and in that moment, the silence screamed louder than truth. The courtroom's energy shifted after Jaden's testimony. His words hadn't just cracked open a window into a private trauma, they had shattered the illusion of untouchable celebrity power. Within 48 hours of his statement, more subpoenas were issued. A second wave of allegations emerged, not just against Diddy, but against individuals connected to the inner workings of his empire: drivers, event planners, security heads. It became clear that if Jaden's account was truthful, he wasn't alone. He was the first domino, and for the Smith family, that realization stung deeper than any tabloid headline ever had. In the days following the testimony, reports surfaced that Will Smith had quietly hired a private investigation firm, something he'd allegedly done months earlier, when he suspected his children were exposed to environments he didn't approve of. Though he had publicly remained composed, privately, Will had been wrestling with guilt. Guilt for trusting too many people, guilt for not being present, guilt for the kind of protection that fame often pretends to offer but rarely does. Sources close to the family said Jaden's emotional weight became most visible during family dinners. One insider shared he would go quiet halfway through, then excuse himself. He had started therapy, but there were days when he just sat in silence, drawing, journaling, or playing the same piece of music over and over. It was in those quiet moments that Jaden began documenting what he remembered, not just that one night, but several. There were photos he had deleted and recovered from cloud backups. There were text messages from Diddy that now read with an eerie subtext. Some messages encouraged Jaden to keep our sessions private, or told him he was special, more than they'll ever understand. The FBI later recovered voice notes from a cloud storage folder, recordings Jaden had made after those events, trying to make sense of what happened. In one haunting audio log, a 16-year-old Jaden can be heard saying, "I don't even know how to talk about it. It felt like he was trying to make me depend on him. Like he wanted me to think only he understood me. I felt trapped. And I didn't even know I was trapped until way later." The prosecution would eventually submit those logs into evidence, with the court ruling them admissible due to their proximity in time to the alleged abuse and the emotional distress Jaden expressed. Meanwhile, Diddy's team was in damage control mode. They issued a sharp statement, claiming Jaden was being manipulated by powerful forces to destroy Sean Combs' legacy. They doubled down on the narrative that the testimonies were performances coached by media lawyers hungry for a takedown. But the public wasn't buying it. Hollywood, long infamous for its hush-hush culture, found itself on trial too. Major outlets began publishing exposés about the invisible grooming pipeline that had existed for years in the entertainment world. Terms like emotional manipulation, power imbalance, and celebrity coercion were now part of the daily news cycle. And Jaden, he didn't just sit still. A few weeks after the court appearance, he did something unexpected. He released a short film titled Glass Walls. The 11-minute video was an abstract, haunting visual piece. There was no dialogue, just flashes of broken mirrors, handwritten notes burning slowly, the sound of a ticking watch, and a teenage boy walking barefoot through a house filled with locked doors. Though Jaden never named Diddy in the film, everyone knew what it was about. Critics praised it as a painful but masterful work of post-traumatic art, while fans flooded social media with messages of support. Some even began sharing their own stories of mentorships gone wrong. For the first time, a generation raised in the glitter of influencer culture was talking about boundaries and who gets to cross them. But amid the growing support, the pressure on the Smiths intensified. Rumors spread that Will and Jada were considering issuing a joint press conference, something they hadn't done since the infamous Red Table Talk, where their marriage had once been dissected publicly. But this wasn't about marriage. This was about protecting their child and reckoning with what they had missed. Behind closed doors, the Smith parents were said to be undergoing counseling together. According to someone close to Jada, she was crushed by the realization that the brand of openness and freedom they raised their kids with may have made them vulnerable in ways they never imagined. In public, Jaden remained quiet. No interviews, no tweets, no live streams, until a surprise appearance at a college panel changed that. In late February 2025, Jaden walked onto a Full Health Symposium stage and announced. The room of students fell silent as he sat down and said, "I wasn't supposed to speak today, but I want to say something for anyone here who feels like your trauma doesn't matter just because the person who hurt you is powerful. That's a lie. Your pain is real, and your story deserves to be told even if it shakes the world." It was the most public comment he had made since testifying, and it hit hard. Within 24 hours, the clip had 18 million views. It wasn't just celebrities who rallied behind Jaden. Mental health organizations, youth advocacy groups, and even members of Congress praised his courage. Senator Elaine Morgan tweeted, "What Jaden Smith is doing takes more strength than any Oscar-winning performance. He's shifting the culture, and that matters." Meanwhile, the legal walls around Diddy's empire were crumbling. Key members of his inner circle began cooperating with prosecutors. A former bodyguard admitted he had been instructed to confiscate phones and disable cameras during private gatherings. A personal assistant confessed she had been paid off to sign multiple NDAs related to underage visitors. And then came the bombshell: flight records and surveillance footage that placed Diddy at the Smith residence the night Jaden described, matching almost minute by minute the timeline Jaden had detailed on the stand. It was no longer just his word, it was evidence. Diddy's attorneys filed motions to have certain testimonies dismissed, calling them emotionally loaded hearsay. But Judge Marcus Levin denied the request, stating, "There is now a pattern of corroboration emerging. This court has a duty to let the facts come to light." What began as a single voice had become a thunderclap of reckoning, and the storm was just beginning. As media coverage surged and court dates loomed, one looming question hovered like smoke over Los Angeles. If this happened under the roof of one of the most powerful families in Hollywood, who else had it happened to? As spring approached, the trial shifted into its most critical phase. What had started with whispers and shock was now a full-scale, legal and cultural reckoning. Journalists from the New York Times, Rolling Stone, and The Guardian fought for courtroom seats. Every testimony, every sigh, every glance exchanged between Diddy and his legal team was dissected in real time on social media. But beneath the flashing headlines and viral clips was something heavier. A nation coming to terms with how long it had looked the other way. The courtroom, once stiff and sterile, had become a theater of buried memories. Witness after witness stepped forward, some protected under anonymity, others brave enough to show their faces. One was a now retired security guard who worked Diddy's Los Angeles estate between 2014 and 2019. He spoke in calm, measured tones, describing a house where the cameras were turned inward, where certain rooms were off limits to staff, and where guests were told to leave their phones at the door. When asked if he ever saw Jaden Smith there, he nodded. Several times, mostly in the studio or around the pool. Always seemed quiet, observant, didn't talk much. The prosecution pressed further. Did anything ever seem off? The guard hesitated, then said, "There was a night I was told not to patrol the West Wing. Lights were off, but I could hear music and voices, soft, like whispers. I knew something wasn't right, but I also knew better than to ask questions." But perhaps the most devastating testimony came from someone who had never intended to speak. Jaden's childhood friend, Xavier, a once aspiring musician who had fallen off the radar for years. Xavier appeared in court wearing a faded hoodie, visibly shaken but resolute. He told the court that he had once attended a weekend retreat at a Malibu villa owned by Diddy. Jaden had invited him, saying it would be cool, low-key, creative energy. Xavier said the weekend began with music and laughter that slowly shifted. People arrived in waves, strangers, some older, some quiet. There were rituals, dim lighting, incense, and what Xavier described as psychological games masked as team-building exercises. He called the experience disorienting. Then he said this: "I walked into one of the guest rooms to find Jaden sitting on the floor. He looked gone, not high, just detached, like his spirit had left the room." The judge asked him to clarify. "I think something happened to him that night, and I think he couldn't explain it, or didn't want to." The room went still. Defense lawyers tried to poke holes in Xavier's memory. They called his account emotional, not factual. But the prosecution knew that it wasn't just about facts anymore, it was about the pattern. The environment, the slow erosion of boundaries that made victims question their own perception of reality. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered daily. Some carried signs that read "Believe Jaden." Others wore black shirts with the words "Power doesn't equal permission." A cultural shift was happening, not just in Hollywood, but across the country. And it was forcing a question onto every parent, fan, and industry executive. How many warning signs had we ignored just because we liked the music? As the trial moved forward, previously sealed documents were made public. Among them, a series of non-disclosure agreements signed by several underage individuals who had attended creative retreats hosted by Diddy between 2015 and 2020. The wording was vague, but chilling phrases like consensual creative intimacy and emotional trust exercises were embedded in legalese that, according to prosecutors, was designed to confuse and silence. What stood out most, however, was one name repeated across multiple NDAs: Jaden Smith. Although Jaden had never signed any of them, the implication was clear. Others were told to keep quiet about interactions involving him. The Smith legal team issued a statement saying they had no knowledge of these documents and would pursue further legal action if it was confirmed that Jaden's name was used without consent. But privately, the family was reeling. Jada, who had once prided herself on raising emotionally intelligent children, confided in friends that she felt played by an entire system. She had seen the invitations to songwriting camps and assumed they were harmless. "I just thought it was industry stuff," she reportedly said through tears. And well, he had stopped attending court altogether. Not out of protest, but out of anguish. According to one friend, it broke him to hear how close the danger had come, how a man he once toasted at parties had slipped into his family's life under the guise of creativity. But Jaden remained strong. Though visibly worn down by the process, he returned to the stand for a second round of questioning. This time, he brought a journal. Inside were pages he had written in real time as a teenager, rambling entries, strange symbols, even blackout poetry constructed from cut-up magazines. The entries were dated, raw, and haunting. One entry read, "Sometimes I feel like a museum of things that didn't happen, but almost did." Another, "They said I was chosen, but for what?" The defense called the journal artistic fiction, but to the jury, it was a window into a mind grappling with a reality that didn't feel real until it was too late. And as the court adjourned for the day, one final revelation sent shockwaves through the building. A sealed letter was submitted to the judge. It had been written by another celebrity child, anonymous, but verified. The letter detailed nearly identical experiences with Diddy, the invitations, the subtle control, the confusion, and it ended with a line that mirrored something Jaden had once said. "I thought this was the price of fame. Now I know it was the price of silence." The courtroom was packed for what everyone anticipated would be the final week of testimony. Tension clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Across the country and the world, viewers tuned in through live blogs, Twitter threads, and cable news segments. The culture was no longer just watching the trial. It was holding its breath. The prosecution called their final witness, a former producer who had worked under Diddy's label for nearly a decade. Calm, measured, and armed with receipts, he wasn't there to offer emotional insight, he was there to connect the dots. He laid out a timeline: emails, travel manifests, unreleased footage, encrypted chat messages, all detailing the infrastructure behind what prosecutors now called a network of behavioral conditioning. One slide in particular made the courtroom gasp: a private itinerary labeled JS Development Program Creative Evolution Retreat, Malibu, 2016. Next to the initials were age notations, JS-17. The producer testified that these programs were not official business trips, they were personal, he explained. Designed to blur the line between professional mentoring and psychological grooming, he added. Jaden wasn't the only one, but he was the one who started asking questions. Those questions had now led to congressional chatter. Senator Ray Hightower from California introduced the proposed bill nicknamed the Creative Protection Act, aimed at shielding minors in the entertainment industry from unchecked access and unsupervised mentorships. And while political momentum was building, the Smith family continued to wrestle with the very personal cost of it all. In a rare public statement outside the courthouse, Jada Pinkett Smith faced the cameras and, with trembling hands, said, "I was so focused on raising free, expressive children, I didn't see the cages being built around them." Jaden is brave, but no parent should ever have to watch their child fight a battle that started in their own living room. The words echoed online for days, but one voice remained notably silent: Will Smith, according to reports, was deeply conflicted. While he supported his son privately, he was also receiving pressure from longtime industry partners to remain neutral. Studios were worried. Investment backers began pulling out of projects tied to both Will and Diddy. Behind the scenes, deals collapsed like dominoes. What had started as a personal reckoning had become a financial earthquake, and Diddy, his empire was bleeding. Streaming numbers dropped. Sponsors severed ties. Artists previously affiliated with Bad Boy Entertainment deleted photos and issued no-comment responses. One brand issued a scathing post: "We stand with survivors. Influence should never be a weapon." Then, the verdict came. The jury returned after just 14 hours of deliberation. Though this trial was a prelude to potential criminal charges, the civil suit carried the weight of symbolic justice. The judge asked the courtroom to remain silent as the foreperson read aloud. "We find the defendant, Sean Combs, liable for emotional and psychological damages inflicted upon the plaintiff, Jaden Smith. Damages awarded, $65 million. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Diddy stared ahead, expressionless, unreadable. His legal team sunk in their seats. Jaden, seated next to his attorney, closed his eyes for a moment. Not in relief, not in victory, but in solemn acknowledgement. Because the truth is, money could never restore what had been taken. The press exploded. News anchors scrambled to update scripts. Twitter was a wildfire of hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Jaden. Hashtag Diddy Verdict. Hashtag The Hollywood Gators. Hashtag Protect the Nexton. But behind the headlines, the human story remained. Jaden later released a brief message through his rep. I never wanted to be a symbol. I wanted to be safe. Thank you to everyone who stood with me, even when it wasn't easy. Healing begins now. He then deleted all his social media platforms. No more curated feeds, no cryptic tweets, no artsy photos, just silence. Insiders said he had moved to a private retreat in New Zealand, off-grid, surrounded by nature, rebuilding. And in Hollywood, the cleanup began. Studios implemented mandatory transparency audits for mentorship programs. Streaming platforms began flagging content tied to any individual under investigation for abuse. And within the music industry, a wave of young artists, especially those raised under major labels, began demanding accountability clauses in contracts. As for Diddy, more lawsuits followed. The civil verdict had emboldened other alleged victims to come forward. The FBI's criminal case picked up speed, and while he hadn't yet been arrested, sources said a grand jury was already in motion. Meanwhile, Will and Jada began reworking their roles not just as parents, but as public figures. Gone were the glossy interviews and red table confessions. In their place, quiet action. They founded a non-profit called the Prism Initiative, designed to provide legal aid and psychological care for young creatives navigating the entertainment world. The mission statement was simple. Every child deserves to shine without being burned. It was a public acknowledgement that something had gone very wrong, and that silence, even when unintentional, had a cost. As for Jaden, his story became more than a tabloid headline. It became a turning point. University courses cited the trial in discussions about power and celebrity. Documentaries were announced. Advocacy movements launched across the globe. But for all the external impact, perhaps the greatest shift was internal within families, studios, and friend groups, where people began asking, what am I missing that I've mistaken for mentorship? What have I excused as charisma? What will I no longer stay silent about? Because Jaden's voice, shaken but unbroken, had sparked a wave of questions the world could no longer ignore. And somewhere far from the cameras, far from the noise, a young man sat beneath a tree, watching the wind carry the pages of his journal across the grass. He didn't chase them, he simply let them go.